Improving your apps, debugging and performance. The hunt for the unicorn performance metric with Tammy Everts.
This is what we're talking about today. I've kind of spent the past 9 years of my life in this hunt. And so what I want to talk about is just sort of the journey to get here and where we're at and kind of what we're looking for when what the goals are when we're looking for meaningful performance metrics. It's going to be a lightning fast talk, about 30 minutes. So unfortunately, probably won't be time for questions at the end. But if you do have any questions, you can message me on Twitter. I'm at Tam Everts right there on your screen. And I'll pop up my contact info at the end of the talk as well. Oh, there it is. Wait a second. I forgot. Always one step ahead of myself. For my day job, I am the Chief Experience Officer at a company called Speed Curve. I work with Stu Souders and Mark Zayman and Joseph Wynn to develop kind of the best performance monitoring tools we can to help people actually measure how fast their sites are and what kind of user experience they're delivering to people. I also, on the side, help curate a website called WPOstats.com, which is a repository of performance case studies, and I invite you to check it out. And as I said before, I've spent 9 years studying performance and how it intersects with user experience and ultimately with business, because why are we all here? We should make the web faster as part of a larger humanitarian effort, obviously, because it's just the right thing to do. But we're all getting paid probably because somebody in a corner office somewhere said performance matters because it affects our business in some way, shape, or form. So I wrote this book that was released about 1.5 years ago by O'Reilly that just writes about how performance matters from a business perspective. So unicorns. I just really like this picture. I had a feeling it's like I live in the Pacific Northwest in the mountains, and it's really gray right now. So I just put this here to wake myself up at 9:10 on a Wednesday morning, and it works. Now I'm wide awake. So this is great. So why care about web performance? Why care about how fast users perceive your site to be? This is an actual screen grab from I was in Sydney, Australia for a conference a couple of months ago. And this was the Wi-Fi in my hotel. That's 1 megabit per second. That's not a typo, 1, and I felt it. The internet still sucks. The internet's still really slow for a lot of people, and more people than many of us probably can imagine or even realize and appreciate what that slowness feels like. So that's part of it. There's this interesting stat, which is how much time the average web user believes they wait. The average person believes that they wait 2 days a year in total for pages to load. That's kind of comes to about 9 minutes a day. I use the internet a lot. I use the internet way more than the average person. I don't actually believe I spend 9 minutes a day waiting for pages to load, except for maybe when I was in Australia. But it's a perceptual thing. People feel it, and basically we're nothing. Our truth is nothing but the sum total of our feelings. So if people are believing that the web and slow pages are this time suck, that's a real thing that we need to somehow manage to address. And why do we feel this urgency around slowness as web users, not as developers or user experience people or engineers? I really like this quote. It's from an article. It's a reader comment from an article that was in the New York Times a few years ago. And it's kind of points to this idea that if we expect the web to be faster, it's just because we're super entitled Gen Xers or millennials or Gen Ys, or I lose track of all the different generations now because I'm Gen X. But just that it's this sense that we're just being demanding, we're just being unrealistic, and we need to just chill out and relax and accept that the web is slow, and that our use of the web is probably trivial and therefore doesn't matter. And I put this quote up there because Um, a lot of people do still feel this way. And it's funny, but it's also really inaccurate. And it's not, it doesn't kind of point to the truth of how we experience the internet. There was a really interesting study that was done by CA Technologies in 2011, where they actually hooked up EEG devices to people and had them go through the paces of using apps and sites that were, kind of were rendering an optimal pace. And another cohort that was using the same sites where they throttled the rendering so that the pages were slower. And what they found when they actually looked at the charts for the people who were in the throttle group were that when the sites were slow, people have to concentrate up to 50% harder to stay on task. And you can joke, oh, what's wrong with that? It's a mental exercise. Great, you should concentrate harder. But actually, that repeated concentration, as we have to constantly refocus our attention on tasks as we go from page to page, or screen to screen, is actually really difficult and really frustrating and really stressful. It's a real thing that happens. Our brains only have so much glucose that they can produce that then gets used in every decision, every cognitive function that we engage in. And when that starts to feel like it's happening too quickly, because our brains aren't really wired to manage sort of the fits and starts of human computer interaction, then it's actually stressful. We feel that. It's like hanger. It's a real thing, web stress. I just throw this slide up just kind of because it's funny, but also true. A few years ago, around the same time that I encountered the CA Technologies research, I thought, I wonder how many people, I wonder if there are any stats out there about how many people have like thrown their phone or, reacted badly when sites were slow for mobile. And sure enough, there was a study. It took me about 5 minutes to unearth this. And what was really funny to me was the fact that I was surprised that 62% of people claimed that they behave more or less normally when sites are slow. I think they might be lying. I've never thrown a phone, but I've definitely been part of this yellow pie on more than one occasion. And so it just, people have this visceral reaction that they can't always normally control. Now, this is a stock image, of course. I hope I found it on a stock site, and I just kind of putting it up here because it makes me laugh every time I look at it. Not so much because of the guy who's throwing the phone in the middle of this what looks like to be a bullpen office space, but I love the woman who's sitting in the background behind him, who just isn't even looking up. Like, he's yelling, he's getting set to throw her phone, and she just doesn't even care because like he does this every day or something like that. So yeah, slow websites and apps, they suck for your visitors. And as I mentioned earlier, they suck for your business. We could see, this is a correlation chart showing user engagement on a site. I can't say which site. And this is a chart that I created in SpeedCurve, where all we did was we plotted the load time of the site across all the traffic across different load times. So you can see the bulk of the pages loaded in kind of 1 to 6 seconds. And what's really interesting is that pink line showing how bounce rate changes, and kind of disregard the high point at in the 0 second cohort, that blue bar, because those are generally 404s and pages that are really, really fast but still have high bounce rates. But what we notice is just the fact that bounce rate almost always increases as pages get slower. And we do similar, and we create similar graphs that show this correlation with start render time and other metrics. Some case studies, just from some brand name sites. Basically, I I have yet to see a site that wasn't able to find some business metric that correlated to performance for them. And sometimes it takes a bit of looking, perhaps for your site, it's a bounce rate that kind of stays the same, although that would surprise me, but it's some other metric that changes. It's cart size, or it's revenue, or it's user retention. But generally, if you dig enough and you map performance to enough different business metrics, you'll eventually find one where performance, making pages faster or slower, moves the needle on that business metric. All of those case studies, by the way, came from WPO Stats, and you can go on there and search by different types of case study, whether you're interested in conversions or cart size or SEO or what have you, and find some really good stuff there if you are interested in making a case for performance for your organization. Some other studies, before I kind of get into the unicorn metric aspect of the talk, I did this study. I was involved in this study a few years ago where we just looked at the impact of throttling pages on returning visitors. So as I think you can see from looking at this chart, the user groups fell into 3 different cohorts. There was one group that experienced a 1,000 millisecond or 1 second delay, a 500 millisecond delay, and then a baseline group that experienced kind of optimal rendering times. And what we found was really interesting. Not surprisingly, the numbers were better for the baseline group overall over the course of the 12 weeks that we did the throttling. But that red vertical bar that you see shows where we stopped the test and actually gave everybody an optimal experience, but it kept tracking them in their different cohorts. And what we saw was really interesting. We saw that even after 6 weeks had passed, after we stopped the study, the groups that had been served the slower pages were not returning at the same rate as the group that had the optimal pages. So there's an ongoing long tail effect of slowness that perpetuates even whenever when you do optimize pages for everyone. Another study that I was involved in 3 or 4 years ago was where it was inspired by the CA Technologies study with the EEG headsets, but we applied that to mobile. And so we put these headsets, this is actually an image from that study, and we had people kind of go through the paces of doing online transactions for mobile for a couple of different, one was a travel site and one was a retail site. And we gave them exit interviews afterwards. And so our test participants did not know they were participating in a performance study. They thought they were just participating in a general usability study where we were getting them to actually just do transactions and let us know what the experience felt like. And what was really interesting was the fact that in the fast group, people had a few negative things to say, like they thought the site was ugly. You can see in small words there. But mostly, there's also confusing, but mostly they said easy to use, better than others, fast, clean, good, easy to buy from, that sort of thing. So mostly positive feedback. The slow group, and again, keeping in mind that these groups were asked to do the same tasks on the same sites from a visual perspective, the only difference was that the slow group had like 500 millisecond delays added to how quickly all the different assets were rendered. So in total, it was maybe like a 3-second delay altogether. But they left and they had way more to say. They complained a lot more about just the design and content and navigation of the site. They said it was slow and hard to navigate and complicated and sluggish and tacky and boring. So even though the only differentiator was slowness, the slowness actually affected people's emotional engagement with the site and their perception of every other aspect of the site and of the brand in general. So slow websites and apps suck. But then we get to where, well, how do we define slow and how do we define suck? And I really like this quote from Steve, and I've been using this quote. I've been quoting Steve for a few years, ever since I read this, so long before I actually worked with him, where the really salient point here is that what we really are when we're trying to manage user experience from a performance perspective is perception brokers. We're really trying to create this feeling of speed, but how do we define what that perception is? How do we measure it? And how do we do this at scale? So this is getting into now the metrics portion of things. So probably if you've been working in performance, if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, you're familiar with some or all of these different metrics. And I'm not going to go into all of them. Most of them are not great metrics from a user experience perspective because they don't actually tell you what the user's seeing on the page. Time to first byte is a back-end metric. Number of requests is really important to know because it's good to know how many assets you're serving on a page, but again, doesn't really say anything in terms of what your users are experiencing, or bytes in terms of the size of the page. Again, good information to have, but not relative to user experience. Or that people seem to have triangulated around for user experience, and their speed index, visually complete, page load, and start render. So let's start with load time or page load. This is kind of the earliest metric that people kind of rallied around, and it's just the pretty much the full time, or almost the entire time that it takes a page to load. So the beginning of the window, the load event or the onload event. Problem with load time is is a good metric, and people still track it because it's interesting to know, like, oh, okay, well, our page is loading in 33 seconds. Why is that? Even if the user is perceiving having a faster experience in that, because you might want to know what's causing all that slowness. But as pages have become more complex, as there are more kind of behind the scenes scripts and third parties and below the fold content, load time has become less and less a meaningful metric from a user perspective. Start render sort of then became the next metric that people were interested in because it sounds like a good one. Basically, it's that time from the start of the initial navigation until something begins to appear in the browser. So you would think that's a good user experience metric because it's letting you know, okay, well, users seeing something, so that's good. The problem there is you don't know what content is being displayed in the browser. Is it content the user even cares about? Is it just a logo? Is it, no disrespect to advertisers? Is it an ad? People aren't necessarily on the media site to see ads. So if the first things that start render are your ads, is that actually going to compel your users to stay? So start render is a problematic metric as well if you're thinking about what the user actually wants to get out of your page. Speed index, which is available in web page test, which if you're not familiar with it already, it's webpagetest.org. It's a free synthetic performance testing tool, and I highly recommend it if you're new to performance and you want to get started. And Pat Meenan, who runs Web Page Test, which is now supported by Google, he does a really great job of being kind of a pioneer in figuring out what metrics to capture in Web Page Test and show you in your test results. And so he pioneered Speed Index, which is a metric that shows when the bulk of your visual content has rendered within the viewport. So that's images, video, and anything else that kind of is considered visual content. And it's a lot better. It's definitely an evolutionary leap forward from start render. And so there's no like direct criticism of it, but it doesn't always capture everything that the user cares about. There's some gotchas with Speed Index about as well. And then visually complete, and it's sort of similar to page load. It's it's when visual progress on the page reaches 100%. So it's that first time that all of the visual content on the page is loaded, and before other content maybe starts swooping in, like say image carousels or ads swapping out. But again, like on load or page load, it's problematic because you're waiting for everything on the page to render. So visually complete can often be, it's actually much slower than what the users actually care about. So just to give you a sense of kind of where all these metrics can sometimes be misleading, is this is a screen grab from a performance test that we did on a media site in SpeedCurve, and it's showing you what some of these key metrics are. So you can see backend metric 0.17, start render 9.47, page load just over 38 seconds, and speed index at 57.85 seconds. All of these metrics on this kind of truncated waterfall at the bottom, but none of them actually correlate to what you see in this film strip view that shows the page rendering at the top, which is that the page kind of starts to come in at 11 seconds and is more or less rendered by 12 seconds. So again, these metrics, all the metrics I just discussed, can be good, and I definitely don't recommend throwing them out, but you need to sanity check them against what your pages actually look like. And this is where film strip views are really, really handy, so that you can say, for my particular site, start render doesn't seem to show me anything particularly meaningful. And for some reason, speed index doesn't as well, although we do find speed index to be closer source of truth. So that brings us to another pair of metrics that I want to talk about that have sort of emerged to fill in these gaps. And TTI stands for time to interactive, and TTFMP is time to first meaningful paint. And there's been a lot of talk about them, especially in the past year. And so let's kind of talk about those. So we need better metrics for measuring user experience. This is the criteria. They need to correlate, these metrics need to correlate to what users actually see in the browser. They need to recognize that not all pixels and elements on the page are equal. And I think everybody would agree to that. Not just because everything is sitting on the page and is above the fold doesn't mean that everything has equal priority. A good metric should allow you to customize what you measure on specific pages. That would be great. And ideally, it's easy to use and accessible right out of the box. So time to interactive, also known as time to consistently interactive. This has become an emerging metric. It is supported by Chrome. What we've found, though, with time to interactive is that it is often just too fast. It's firing far too quickly, and it's not really giving you a sense of when you can actually, just because the page has become interactive, it's in the browser, things are happening, it doesn't mean you can actually interact with the page. So it's a bit of a misleading name. You can do something on the page, but you can't necessarily do what you want to do, or users can't do what they want to do on the page. And so there are some gotchas in there. And then time to first meaningful paint is the paint after which the biggest above the fold layout changes happened and web fonts have loaded. So we find that with time to first meaningful paint that often that can actually be not necessarily correlating with what people really see on the page as well. So I'll go into a little bit more about both of those in a minute. Just to talk about naming for a second, because going back to time to interactive and time to first meaningful paint, there's kind of a side issue of how we name our metrics, and the names that we give to our metrics are really, really powerful. So time to interactive, when that metric first kind of emerged, it was I think originally conceived as being when users could actually interact with a page, when a significant amount of content was available on the page for users to interact with. And it's kind of morphed over the past couple of years to become something different. Yet because of its name, people assume that it kind of means one thing when it actually means something else, words are tricky. And time to first meaningful paint is kind of the same thing. You think that the word meaningful means, okay, well, it's going to be the most important content on the page, and that's not necessarily the case. So kind of to fill in for these gaps, we came up with a new set of metrics at Speed Curve called Hero Times. And you could read more about them in the link that's on this slide. But what these are we realized that when a lot of our users, a lot of Speed Curve users, were trying to understand how quickly their pages render for their users, generally what they were trying to measure were these things. What was the largest image on the page, which is usually a hero image or some kind of banner image, and then also largest background image. Because sometimes the largest image would end up being, we found that when we actually did our testing of these different metrics, that the largest image wasn't necessarily the most important image. So we kind of came up with this alternate version, which is largest background image. So between largest image and largest background image, you would generally get one or the other of those would be the correct largest image. And H1 is, of course, when the first H1 tag, the first H1 header is rendered on the page. And so, let me see. This is what that looks like in a waterfall with film strips. So what we tell people is look at, if you're measuring hero rendering times, find the hero rendering time again and sanity check it against your waterfalls, and see which one actually correlates to user experience for you, which one just looks like the right one. So in this case, you can see that the H1 render is probably the fastest metric in terms of showing you something meaningful from the user's perspective. So that's a good metric for this particular site to focus on and to create performance budgets for, to create alerts for, and things like that. For another site, it was largest image render. So again, looking, sanity checking the metrics against your own film strips. And then for another site, it was largest background image render. But we generally found that with these three metrics, people could get closer to having out of the box synthetic metrics that actually measure what people are seeing. You can read more about those metrics here, as I mentioned, on our blog. So which of these metrics is best? We did another post where we actually did an analysis, because obviously, we're attached to our metrics, but all these other metrics, we don't want to, as I said earlier, we don't want to just sort of throw them out. We did an analysis where we looked at 100 top websites, and we kind of put them through their paces. And actually what I would really love is for all of you folks to go and actually try this little experiment on your own. The link at the top of the page will take you to this rendering picker, and you can actually test what performance metric comes closest to when you yourself consider the page to being ready. So if you go to this site, or they go to this page, you will you just click on the frame that measures when you consider the page to begin to be interactive, when you consider the page to have rendered enough meaningful content for you. And it's completely blind. Like, I did this test and I didn't know which metric was going to correlate with which frame. And you go through, pick all the metrics, or pick all the frames that you care about, and at the bottom it'll give you a score, and it will tell you which metrics actually seem to matter the most for you. And it was really interesting. So we did this ourselves, and we had a bunch of people do it, and we tallied the results with, as I said, 100 top sites. And the winner was, no surprise, anybody who works in tech, there was no clear winner. It really depends on what you're looking for. So there was, I shouldn't say there was no clear winner. We did find that hero rendering times, because we were all doing the test, and people that we were that were doing the picker, we told them specifically to ask to look for when you thought critical content rendered. And for those people, hero rendering times was the dominant metric for most of those people. However, if you care about just delivering any content to the user because you feel it's really important that the user just sees something, and that will prevent them from bouncing because at least they're seeing something and they're not seeing a blank screen for too long, then for that type of user and that type of goal, start render was actually the best metric for delivering a significant amount of content. If you ask people, well, what frame do you think shows that enough content is rendered that you would consider this page to be pretty well rendered, then it's speed index and first meaningful paint. So there's no unicorn. There's a donkey with a plunger on his head. There's just you really need to know yourself, your users, your site. Be aware of your own biases when you're thinking about what you consider meaningful render. Which of these camps do you fall into in terms of what you consider meaningful, and kind of triangulate around the unicorn metric for you in that way. Now, if you really want to get into the weeds and really look for the closest there is to an actual unicorn, then I highly encourage you to check out custom metrics. The nice thing with custom metrics is they're available in synthetic tools and RUM tools. Once you've put these timestamps, and I've included links here so that you can look them up and learn how to do this. Once you put these timestamps on your page that say are wrapped around what's your hero image, or what's the most important content or pieces or elements on the page that you need to measure, you can actually get very, very specific with your own site and the elements that you care about, and do that. And that's probably the closest to a unicorn there is. Having said that, the reason why it's good to have another metric or at least 2 or 3 metrics in your back pocket, like hero times or start render or speed index, is because we found that if you look at the top 1 million sites in the HTTP archive, only 15% of them are using custom metrics, because custom metrics are, they're tricky to implement. You have to have some level of technical know-how, and you have to maintain them. Your pages are changing. You need to go in and tweak your marks and measures. So so there's that caveat there. So really, when evaluating the best metric for you, you always want to keep these criteria in mind. You want to ask yourself, does this metric mean, is it assuming that every pixel on the page has the same value? That makes it a questionable metric. Do you want to just grab it automatically? Is it something that's captured by the browser or by your monitoring tool automatically? Or do you want to get in there and do something custom, like custom metrics via the user timing spec? Do you need it for synthetic? Do you need it for RUM? So just kind of keeping all these criteria in mind is really important. And again, why should you care? Well, if all the reasons that I talked about earlier weren't enough in terms of just, user perception and business metrics, here's something to keep in mind. These days, 65% of seniors use the internet. These seniors, which are a large cohort of internet users, are 43% slower at using websites than users between 21 and 55. And keep in mind that someday that will be us. This isn't something that this slow perception isn't something that kicks in when you turn 65. We actually start losing cognitive function in terms of our ability, our visual acuity, our manual dexterity, our mousing dexterity. Our ability to use the web declines by almost 1% a year, starting at the age of 25. So some of us are already like halfway through there. So do this for yourself, if not for other people. Do it for future you. That's my feel good message for your midweek. So thank you very much. I think I've gone over by a few minutes. But as I said, you can reach me on Twitter at Tam Everts. I'm happy to answer any questions there. And you can email me directly. I'm Tammy at speedcurve.com.
Thanks for watching.